Hello to all foreign residents in Japan. Suppose you find yourself facing trouble in your workplace while you work in Japan. Would you know what to do? Among many different Japanese laws, the one that matters to you the most when you work in Japan is the Labor Standards Act. If you familiarize yourself with the law, you would be able to protect yourself from undesirable working conditions or troubles in the workplace. You will also have an idea of what actions you should take to resolve such issue. Let's start with a pop quiz. Try correctly answering the following questions by answering right or wrong. 1. When confirming your working conditions with your employer, it is okay if you just get a verbal agreement, not a written contract. 2. Suppose you work as a cashier. Your employer is allowed to pay you less wage than your Japanese colleague because you are not proficient in Japanese. 3. You're not entitled to annual paid leave unless you work consecutively for more than 1 year. 4. You are informed by your employer that they cannot pay for your overtime work due to the company's poor business performance, but there's nothing you can do about it. Were you able to answer these questions easily? In this video, we will go through basic work rules you should know when working in Japan. If you know what to be aware of, you may be able to protect yourself from unwanted troubles in the workplace. You can find the answers to the pop quiz throughout the video. What kind of work do you currently do? Or what kind of work are you thinking of doing? In recent years, we've been seeing diversified work styles in Japan. Apart from full-time employment, there are also part-time and temporary employment, fixed-term contract, among others. In Japan, more people are choosing not to be hired by a business, but to work independently, such as a freelancer. The big difference between those who are hired and those who work independently is that the Labor Standards Act applies to individuals who are hired, whom the law refers to as worker. In this video, we will refer to this worker as employee. So how is an employee defined under the Japanese labor law? An employee is defined as 1. Someone who is employed by a business. 2. Someone who receives wages from the business by which he or she is employed. Any individual who meets the above two conditions will be applied the same rules under the Labor Standards Act, regardless of occupation, type of contract, or nationality. Let's take a closer look. The Labor Standards Act applies to an individual who is hired by a business, whether they are full-time, part-time, temporary, or fixed-term contract employees. An employee will need to conclude a labor contract in which the employer is obligated to indicate certain items, such as working conditions. If you are going to be hired by a business, the work rules explained in this video will be important for you to know. On the other hand, the Labor Standards Act does not apply to individuals who work independently, such as a freelancer, a YouTuber, or some people in the entertainment industry like actors, just to name a few examples. Such individuals may work under an outsourcing contract or service contract. The law also does not apply to someone who is in a top management position, such as corporate executive, CEO, or a business owner. This video could also be useful should you ever be in a position to hire employees. Now, we will explain about some key points you should be aware of when you work in Japan. First, let's look at working conditions. Working conditions, such as working hours, wages, and job responsibilities, are one of the top reasons that people decide to choose a certain job or change jobs. An employer is required by law to provide an employee with a written document indicating his or her working conditions. This document is called Notice of Employment. The document may also be called labor contract or employment contract. Whatever name it goes by, make sure to obtain a written document which clearly indicates the details of your working conditions and read it through carefully. The law was amended in 2019 to allow an employee to obtain the document from the employers in a digital format by email or social media services. In that case, we strongly encourage you to print it out and keep a hard copy as a backup in case the digital document becomes inaccessible. Let's look at what information the employers is obligated to indicate the notice of employment. 1. Term of employment. It should include the starting and ending date of your employment. If you're going to be working fixed term, what are the rules of extending your contract? 2. Locations of employment. 3. Contents of duties. What will be your job responsibilities? 4. Working hours. What time do you start and end work? How many hours will you be working per day? 5. Overtime work. Will there be any overtime work? If so, how much overtime should you expect? 6. Break time. How long is your break time per day? 7. Days off and annual paid leave. How many days do you get off and when? 8. Compensation. How much wage will you receive? Is your basic wage determined by the hour, day, or month? Are there going to be any allowance paid, such as commute allowance? 9. When is the closing day of your payroll? When is your payday, and what will be the method of wage payment? 10. Termination. If you decide to resign from your job, when and how should you notify your employer? It is important for you to confirm your working conditions with your employer in written format. What you see on a job listing may be different from your actual working conditions indicated in your notice of employment, so make sure to check the content of such document carefully. However, there are exceptions made to certain businesses, such as in the retail and hotel industries with less than 10 employees. Now, let's talk about days off. Many Japanese companies adopt a 5-day workweek system, meaning that employees get every Saturday and Sunday off. This, however, is not a statutory rule. The law only requires an employer to grant their employees at least 1 day off per week or 4 days off in a 4-week period. So, if not obligated by law, why do many companies adopt this 5-day workweek system? It has to do with the statutory rule on basic working hours that we talked about earlier. The rule that says basic working hours should be limited to 8 hours per day, 40 hours per week. If an employee works 8 hours a day from Monday to Friday, then the total working hours per week will naturally reach the statutory limit of 40 hours. As a result, employees at many companies get every Saturday and Sunday off. So, let's take a further look at the Japanese workweek system. There are 2 types of workweek system that are prevalently adopted by companies. One is the 5-day workweek system, as mentioned earlier, and the other is the 6-day workweek system. It is confusing, so we will explain about each type and the differences between the two. Calendar 1 on the left-hand side shows the 5-day workweek system. Big corporation and financial institutions, for example, adopt this system. As shown in the calendar, business is closed to all Saturdays, Sundays, and public holidays, meaning that employees will always have at least 2 days off every week. Calendar 2 on the right-hand side shows the 6-day workweek system. Businesses, such as in the distribution and retail industries, welfare, and medical services, adopt this system. Suppose that business is closed every Wednesday. Employees will get Wednesday off every week, plus one additional day depending on their job shift. In other words, employees working for such business will have 1 or 2 days off per week, but not necessarily always have 2 days off every week. Please note that the rules on day off will vary depending on the industry or job type. 44.9% of Japanese companies adopt the 5-day workweek system, while 37.5% adopt the 6-day workweek system. We'll talk about annual paid leave. In order to be productive, it is important to take some time off from work to rest. When you work too long without resting, you're more prone to feel stress, so use your paid holidays wisely to take some time off from work to refresh yourself. So, how is annual paid leave granted? According to the Labor Standards Act, an employer must grant 10 days of annual paid leave if an employee has worked for more than 6 consecutive months from the hiring date and has worked more than 80% of the scheduled workdays. For example, if you're hired as of April 1st, you should be granted 10 days of annual paid leave as of October 1st. A recent survey shows that the usage rate of annual paid leave in Japan has reached a historical high of 56.3%. A law amendment has obligated employers to ensure that an employee who is granted 10 or more days of annual paid leave take at least 5 days off per year, which has made it easier for employees to actually use their paid holidays. Part-time employees are also entitled to annual paid leave. Unlike full-time employees who work 5 days a week from Monday through Friday, part-time employees often work in shifts, which means their work schedule may be inconsistent from week to week. In that case, the number of annual paid leave granted to each part-time employee is determined by the number of his or her workdays, as shown in the chart. For example, if you have a contract to work 3 days a week, then you're entitled to 5 days of annual paid leave. If you want to use your paid holidays to travel back to your home country, please consult with your employer. In that case, remember that it is important to submit your holiday request well in advance. If you wait too long to make the request, you may run in the risk of not being granted the holidays as you desire. If a job requires overtime work, an employer must clearly indicate that there will be overtime work and confirm with an employee how many hours of overtime he or she is able to work. If a job requires work on days off, then an agreement must be made between an employer and an employee. This agreement on overtime work and work on days off is stipulated in Article 36 of the Labor Standards Act, so it is commonly known as a 36 Agreement. Apart from the 36 Agreement, the law also obligates an employer to pay an additional wage for overtime work. An employer must pay an increased rate of at least 25% for any work done in excess of statutory working hours. So, if your wage is 1,000 yen per hour, your overtime pay will be 1,000 yen times 1.25, or 1,250 yen per hour. Next, we will talk about rules regarding wage payment. There are 5 basic principles an employer must follow regarding monthly wage payments made to an employee. Monthly wages must be paid: 1. In currency. 2. Directly to an employee. 3. In full amount. 4. At least once a month. 5. On a fixed day of every month. Apart from the monthly wages, there may be bonus payments and severance pay. Unlike monthly wage payment, which is required by law to be paid at least once a month, there is no statutory obligation for an employer to pay bonuses to employees. Bonuses are determined by each company. The bonus amount you see on a job listing is usually an amount paid in the previous year, so it does not mean that you will be paid in same amount. The actual bonus amount will vary according to the individual performance of an employee as well as business performance of the company. As for severance pay, there are companies that do not have a severance pay system in place, so please confirm with your employer on bonus and severance pay. Next, we will explain about minimum wage in Japan. A law called the Minimum Wage Act determines minimum wage by each prefecture. For example, the current minimum wage is 885 yen in Shizuoka Prefecture, 1,030 yen in Tokyo, and 792 yen in Okinawa. You can check the minimum wage in your location of residence from the QR code shown on this slide. Minimum wage is reviewed in October of every year. There will be years when there is no change in the amount, but make sure to check regularly so that you are always up to date and you can avoid working below minimum wage. Even if you're paid by the monthly pay system, you should recalculate your pay by the hour and make sure you are not paid below minimum wage. Here, we show a sample of a typical payslip. You will receive a payslip every month at time of your wage payment, so that you can see the breakdown of what is paid to you each month. We will explain about the main items listed on a payslip in the next slide. A payslip is an important document which includes information like how many hours you worked and whether you're paid appropriately for the hours worked. In most cases, you will receive a hard copy of your payslip, but an increasing number of companies are opting for a soft copy. In whatever form your payslip comes, please make sure to check the details. What should you do when you find a payroll error? Next, let's look at employee rules. Many companies have employee rules in place. These rules are determined by each company and include work rules which an employer and an employee agree to follow, such as working conditions, wages, work regulations, termination, etc. An employer with more than 10 employees must implement employee rules and either hand out a hard copy or have a digital document available so that employees can refer to them at any time. Apart from those required by the law, employee rules may include rules that are unique to the company, so make sure to read it through. Earlier, we briefly talked about items that are deducted from your wage payment. An employer, which is not obligated to provide all 4 types, is a private business with less than 5 employees. If you get injured or become ill due to work, or get injured during you commute to work, you're entitled to use the Industrial Accident Compensation Insurance. In that case, when you receive medical treatment at a hospital, do not use your own health insurance card. Notify your employer, and your employer will take necessary procedures. You will not have to make any payments for the medical treatment. Insurance premiums will be covered by your employer. This insurance will not cover full-time employees, but also part-time employees, so inform your employer if any accident occurs at work or during your commute. Next, what should you do when your labor contract terminates? In some cases, an issue may arise where an employer will not let an employee resign. Even if an employee gives a resignation notice as determined by the company rule, the employer might refuse. Remember that an employee has the right to quit, as clearly indicated in Article 627 of the Civil Code. It states that if an employee submits a request for resignation, then employment shall terminate upon the expiration of 2 weeks from the day the resignation request was submitted. If you decide to quit your job, You should confirm company rules on when and how you should submit your resignation. If your employer refuses to accept your resignation, please consult with the public agency for assistance. Next, let's look at frequently encountered troubles in the workplace. The Japanese have created a combination of English words to describe the different types of harassment that unfortunately occur in the workplace. Power harassment, pawahara. Sexual harassment, sekuhara. Moral harassment, morhara. Social harassment, sohara. A maternity harassment, matahara, among others. Harassment is doing or saying something offensive to someone to make that person feel uncomfortable or intimidated. If you get harassed, it is important to get up the courage to let the harasser know that you want him or her to stop. Be firm. Taking an ambiguous attitude will not help. If you need someone to intervene, contacting a help desk at your company or speaking with your supervisor are effective means to deal with the harassment. If that does not resolve the issue, you can always consult with the public agency. In case you do, you should keep a record of when, date, and time, and what harassment you encountered. There are many people working in a single workplace, each with different ways of thinking. Even if you said something that only meant to be a light joke, could be hurtful to someone else. Always remember to have respect and consideration when communicating with your colleague. Now, let's think about the obligations and the rights of employees. The law protects various rights that employees are entitled to, but in order for employees to exercise such rights, they must also fulfill certain obligations. You may find yourself in trouble with your employer if you just insist on claiming your rights but not carrying out your responsibility. It is important to find the right balance between fulfilling your duties and claiming your rights. So, what exactly are obligations of employees? Upon concluding a labor contract, an employee takes on several obligations to provide labor to the employer. First, there is the obligation to give undivided attention to duties. This means, for example, not playing games on your smartphone, but staying focused on your duties while you are at work. This is very much a common sense. But lately, many people seem to have a hard time fulfilling this obligation. So, if it rings a bell, please bear this in mind. Next, there is obligation to self-management, which is also very important when you work. When you cannot maintain a healthy lifestyle and you showed up late to work or unexpectedly take a day off due to sickness, your colleague will have to make up for the work that you should be responsible for. If such circumstances persist, it'll definitely leave a negative impression on your employer that you're irresponsible and undependable. To perform your duties appropriately, you will need to have a discipline to take a good care of yourself. You might share some confidential information on social media or when talking with a friend without thinking too much about it. This means that your employer has high expectations of you. So keeping this in mind may help in maintaining a good relationship with your employer. Lastly, do not hesitate to consult with someone if you're unsure of how to deal with the trouble you encountered at work. You may be confronted with different kinds of issues when you work. Consulting with someone may help you to resolve an issue. If you do not know anyone you can consult with, the internet could be useful. But keeping in mind that information you find on the internet may be untrue or out of date, so it may be better to refer to a more trustable source like public agency or your school if you went to school in Japan. If your employer has a labor union, that is another trustable source you can go to. Here's a detailed list of public agency you can contact, which you can find by reading the QR code on the slide. Remember, don't keep it all to yourself. Ask for help when necessary. The Labor Standards Act covers the areas which we did not introduce in this video. If you ever encounter work-related issues, remember to refer to the Labor Standards Act, which is designed to protect each and every worker in Japan.